school, when I was young, old enough to like a boy, but young enough to have no clue what that meant, there was a boy who I thought was my boyfriend and who said he was my boyfriend, but also completely ignored me in school. It's a sad, silly story lots of girls know. It was fine, because when we were together, he made me feel like he could fill my gaping void. He was terrible, but he was also charming and persuasive. I was nerdy and friendless, all lanky limbs and crazy hair, and he was beautiful and popular. I accepted the state of affairs between us. We would hang out in his older brother's bedroom, flip through worn copies of Hustler and Playboy magazine, and I would examine these naked women, mostly young, white, blonde, thin, taut. Their bodies seemed alien to me, unreal. I knew it was wrong to look at these women displaying such wanton nakedness, but I couldn't look away. He clearly found them exciting, sexually attractive, and I knew even then that I was nothing like them. I didn't really want to be like them, but I wanted him to want me, and I wanted him to look at me the way he looked at those magazines. He never did. And in his way, he punished me for what I wasn't and could never be. He punished me for being too young and too naive, too adoring, and too accommodating. I was a thing to him long before he and his friends raped me. He was fine. He was terrible, and I was a thing to him long before he and his friends raped me, and I didn't know how to say no. It never crossed my mind to say no. This was the price I had to pay to be loved by him, or, if I was being honest with myself, to be tolerated by him. For a girl like me, shy and unworthy and sheltered and absolutely desperate for his attention, I didn't dare hope for anything more. I knew that. In her books, Hunger and Bad Feminist, Roxane Gay discusses a brutal assault at age 12 she endured at the hands of a boy and his friends. She also discusses the weeks before the assault, wherein her complicated sexual relationship with the boy was, in her words, the price she had to pay to be tolerated by him. The ways we talk about consent in this country have grown wildly in quality over recent years. We know more now than we used to. We know about power dynamics and coercion. I'm the president of Planned Parenthood here at Duke, and we use the Fry's model of consent. We say consent has to be freely given, reversible, enthusiastic, and specific. Today, I want to talk about the people, and the women especially, who are consenting to things freely, enthusiastically, informed, specifically, to things that are happening just after sex. I want to talk about the space between sex and the way sex can make you feel, and the problems that arise from girls consenting to one to get the other. I want to prove to you that girls of color in America are taught to crave being sexually desired and warned that they do not deserve it. I want to explain that our current consent models cannot always handle a woman of color's yes, when her yes is to the sexual and emotional validation she's been taught to want, and not at all to the physical contact that comes along with it. And most of all, I want any young person watching at the end of this to be able to ask themselves, what do I really want out of sexual activity? And what am I offering up to get it? But first, I have to prove things to you, prove that I'm not just some alarmist, snowflake Gen Zer, and there really are swaths of young people, especially young people of color, who are having sex to gain the emotional and social validation they are being withheld, and not for physical pleasure. So proof one, women are socialized to need male attention to feel whole. As noted TED speaker Cheryl Strayed once wrote in the New York Times, we live in a culture that grants women and girls power and validation based first and foremost on their sexual appeal to men. Upon first breath, girls are socialized to be lots of things, plenty of them good, funny, generous, clever, but no trait is as emphasized or as valued as the ability to be sexually desired by men. In a 2006 study out of USC Annenberg of the 100 top-grossing G-rated films of the 90s and 2000s, fewer than 1 out of every 3 speaking characters was a female. From 2007 to 2013, there was not a single year where girls or women made up more than 33% of the speaking characters in movies. When girls see themselves on screen, it's in characters very clearly valued for their visual contributions, meant to be seen and not heard. And as those girls get older, they do start to see more of themselves on screen. And by more of themselves, I mean their naked bodies. In an analysis of 1,100 movies, more than 25% of female characters show some amount of nudity, where fewer than 10% of male characters do. And worst of all, in those movies, girls aged 13 to 21 are just as likely to be nude as women aged 21 to 39. In the movies, before girls hit puberty, they're silent, and after they hit puberty, they're naked. Media does not just represent reality, often it constructs it. Not just what's cool, but also what's socially acceptable. Media elevates the current truth of what society values right now, and the women on screen in TV and film cumulatively explain to individual little girls what they ideally should be. And in their case, the answer is silent, naked, and more often than not, there to serve a man. Proof 2. Gender and marginalized identity meet at an intersection to result in even more hypersexualization and a social resistance to healthy sexual attachment. Women of color are even less represented than white women, and when they are represented, they are even more hypersexualized. In an analysis of 252 magazine covers, only 52 of them displayed women of color. Of the 90% of them that did feature a woman of color, had hypersexual context clues, content, and images. And 90% of the women of color who were featured on those magazines had their ethnic features masked in some way by whiteness, be that be hair straightening or skin lightening. Remember how earlier I said that the women on screen in TV and film cumulatively explain to individual little girls what they ideally should be? That's true in a broad sense, in the understanding that there are lots of characters present in a generic TV show, and girls gradually and broadly pick up on what traits are being valued and what traits are being hated on. Magazines are more specific. There are no ugly Bettys, no plain Janes, no Duffs on the cover of Vogue, whereas they might exist in other media as a foil. Nobody gets on a magazine cover to show you what not to be. Magazines are a reveal of the true ideal, the current elite, and if you want to be part of that elite, as a woman of color, you better be hypersexual and you better be as white as possible. The social order has gotten better at representing different forms of people in media, but not all representation is inherently of valuing. And in that way, girls of color know there's still only one path to value: sexual availability and a proximity to whiteness. If you want to be on TV with your skin and your hair, you have to pay a price. Let's harken back to the words of the incomparable Roxane Gay, paraphrased, saying yes was the price she had to pay to be tolerated by a white boy. To that I say that sexual availability is the penance girls of color pay for the sin of non-whiteness. If you want to be elite, you have to pay a price. Which is kind of awkward because, there aren't that many magazine covers for girls of colors to get on, which is why sex with any boy Seems like the necessary path to prove that you are living up to the ideal facets of girlhood. Desirability is the tree falling in the forest. Someone around you has to admit that they heard it. It's not enough to be sexy. A man has to agree that you are sexy. And it's not even really about sexy. A man has to agree that you are worth something, but ideally worth something should look like being a girlfriend or, I don't know, something silly like a dignified human being worthy of respect, but all too often takes the form of paying sex for toleration and the half-baked glow of a boy's attention. Which leads us to a complicated spot, because girls and women have a complete and sacred control over their bodies, and it's not up to me or anyone to tell them what kind of sex they should be having. But real problems do arise from sex of misplaced desire. I don't have any useful rules for you. There's no one-size-fits-all way to tell when a 17-year-old wants physical pleasure versus the glow of a boy's attention. I just want more teen girls to be aware of this, because I promise you, enough teen boys are. Think of all the way teen boys try to get a girl in bed. I love you, you're so beautiful, I never met anybody so special. Teen girls know when they're being tricked into sex. The question is how to know when they are tricking themselves. To any teen girl watching this, ask yourself, what do you like about rolling around with that boy? What actually feels good? Is it the act itself, or is it the after? When you're thinking about it, when you're feeling the full flush of his desire, could you imagine saying no to him? Have you ever? Would he treat you as nicely? If you did, what do you even want from him? Could he ever really satisfy you or love you? Do you want things from him he could not give you, like your own self-esteem? Girls of color are paying for the sin of non-whiteness with their bodies. We can continue this sinning metaphor and argue that sexual desirability is the heaven I have hopefully proved that girls are trained to want. You know, in the Catholic Church, we believe that everybody goes to purgatory, at least for a little bit, to burn off any sin and be pure enough to enter heaven. My point this whole time is that we have an inability to hear young girls when they say, I want to go to heaven, and we hear them say, I want to burn. We have taught girls to want something we have placed behind the door of sexual availability, and we are not skeptical enough when they say they want the door itself. To any young girl listening to this, ask yourself, do you want heaven or do you want the fire? And could that growing, fumbling boy ever truly give you either? And could you accept it before you learned to give it to yourself? Thank you.